Well, every Vanguard protagonist must have a polar opposite. Aichi had Ren, Kai had Galard, because red flames and blue flames, which this one plays with blue flames. Chrono had Ryuzu, and now we have Yu Yu with Mirei. So today we are going over the Basagra deck, or you could simply call this the weapon deck, because Basagra's playstyle focuses on equipping weapons, which is something that many Vanguard players have been craving. Because the idea of equipping happens in Bushiroad's other games like Buddy Fight, although that did discontinue, but they had items to equip. So Vanguard could do something with that, and now with Basagra it finally became a thing. Especially with the overdress format, we've been getting a lot of unique decks with unique styles. And this is also a Dragon Empire deck, and basically the polar opposite of Nirvana. The Seal Blaze Maidens, the blue flames to Nirvana's red flames. And considering that I like the style and the design of Basagra, I just have to build it, because the blazing hot waifu, the dragon waifu that controls dragons as well. And I just love it. So how this deck functions, like I said before, it focuses on equipping weapons. That's basically all it is. You just need to remember which side that you're specifically supposed to put on Basagra, because in many ways, this is going to look like a maximum summon if you know Yu-Gi-Oh! 7 terms. Or, in Vanguard terms, it is basically like Legion, where you're connecting card artwork. And that's basically how you're going to be playing this deck. And most of the weapons are designed in a specific direction based on the artwork of Basagra. Because you could clearly see Basagra's wing is missing, the weapons are going to complete the artwork for you. That's basically the sign on which side you're going to be putting it on. And now with set 4, this deck actually finally feels like it has its own identity. Because with the start deck, it was only in introduction and basically kind of didn't have its own identity. Instead, many people were just playing Basagra Overdress. And I do get why, because Basagra really synergizes really well with the Overdress stuff, especially because one of her skills actually combos well with it. And also, because if you watch the anime, the person who plays Basagra originally owned the Trickstar. So it actually makes a lot more sense when you actually watched it. And that's my thoughts on it. So let's begin with the deck profile. So we start off with the Ride deck. Seal Blaze Dragon Arisa. This is your starter, and yes, it will be important for you to play this starter because you specifically need this one as your starter for your grade 1. And just look at its design. It's clearly bluish flames, right? Which the grade 1 is Seal Blaze Dragon Narman card, where when you ride it on top of the grade 0, you can Soul Blast one. You can search your deck for a Swayamba or a Prehifti, aka your sword or the shield in this deck, or the start deck weapons. Most of the time, you're going to be searching for the shield, because that's the main one that you always want to equip and pretty much have all times, because that's a defensive weapon, obviously. So, of course, that helps you set things up. And second skill, it just gets plus 2k if your Vanguard's armed, which you're not going to be caring too much, but you will sometimes call this because Basagra's skill. And then we go to the grade 2, Hahibla, still a Seal Blaze Dragon. So when you ride on Vanguard, you can return one arms card from your drop zone and put it back to your hand. Your grade 1 just searches it out, your grade 2 just returns it back to your hand, which is going to happen because you will just discard the weapon to your drop zone to ride this, and then you just put that card back to your hand. Yeah, it's just a typical negating minus grade 2 like most of the ride lines. And then second skill, plus 5k if your Vanguard's arm, but this is not going to happen. And then we go to the grade 3, Seal Blaze Maiden Basagra. So first off, her skill is, once per turn, when you arm it, you can soul charge one and then call grade 1 or less from the drop zone. That's basically the lore of being able to control the dragons by resurrecting them with her blue flames. Very cool. And that's also what I mean that you can basically use the overdress stuff in this deck, because being able to call any grade 1s or less, which your Trickstar is a grade 0, you can also do, but your deck space will be super tight, I'm not gonna lie. But her second skill is, once per turn, if she's armed with 2 cards, you can Soul Blast 2, nuke your opponent's front row, and it gets plus 1 crit. That itself is pretty good. Nuking your opponent's front row basically gets rid of their intercept, and plus 1 crit gives out pressure. Especially when there's no grade 3 restriction involved, that's pretty nice. And getting the 2 weapons in your first grade 3 turn isn't difficult because of the new support. So there are ways to do it. But her first skill is just really good just because that's just a free plus right there. And her arms will determine on what fighting stance it will be. Because it looks like she just gets a crit but no power, which can be really underwhelming. But the weapons actually determine the fighting style that you will be in. in which we go to the main deck itself. First off, for personal writing reasons, of course, you run the 3 extra copies. You don't have to do it, and I am hoping for an evolution of it, but it does cause a little problem because her weapons are specifically only on her name, so her evolve form will need to override that somehow. In which now we could go to the weapons. First, I'm going to put this Basagra in the middle so we know which weapon's position that's supposed to be at. So first off, we're going to start off with the right-armed weapons, with the trial deck one. That being Seal Blaze Sword Perhifti. Goes on her right side. You play it by Soul Blasting 1. And then during your turn, the equipped unit gets plus 10k, or the arm unit, but I'm going to say equip because it makes more sense to me. And after the battle that your Vanguard attacks, you can counterblast 2 to put this to the drop zone and deal 1 damage to your opponent if your opponent's at 4 or less. It's just there where like you do one final blow by throwing the sword at your opponent, and this is basically an offensive weapon, but this is one that you're going to be mostly using at your second grade 3 turn most of the time, just for that deal 1 damage skill. But just be aware of the cost because this deck does get a little soul heavy. The counterblast 2 shouldn't be too much of a problem based on my experience with this deck, but you do use that quite a bit. And then for the next right-armed weapon, Seal Blaze Spear Adihara. I'm going to be butchering most of these names because they're pretty Indian-like names, so I'm not going to be really good at pronouncing them. So you play by counterblasting 1, and then when you play it, you can draw a card and equip another order this turn. This is very helpful because now you could equip 2 weapons in 1 turn. This is basically your equip weapon for speed, because you would equip this and then equip another one, which will let you now activate Basagra's second skill to nuke your opponent's front row. And then the other skill is that your Vanguard gets plus 10k during your turn. But of course that helps, 23k plus a crit really helps, and that's the same with the sword as well. But after the turn that you use this, most likely you're going to be equipping the sword because 1 is to trigger Basagra's first skill to call another card. And 2, this doesn't really do much other than give the 10k. The sword does a little more. 1, it could finish off your opponent. And 2, since you're trying to throw the sword at your opponent, it kind of encourages you to equip another weapon again and not really waste a weapon. So yeah, most of the time you just need this for early game. That's why you just want to see as soon as possible, and that's why you run 4. Hence my 4 copies. And now for the left-handed weapons. First off, we start off with the shield. For your left-handed weapon, this is going to be the one that you're going to be mostly on all the time. Because you play by counterblasting 1, but during your opponent's turn, it's a free 10k shield once per turn. And there's no cost to it. There's usually no reason to unequip this weapon unless you're trying to go full offensive mode. And this is also searchable through your ride line. And you're going to be searching for this pretty much all the time. So you don't really need to run more than 1. And this card will never unequip itself unless you willingly do so for this next one if you want to go full offensive mode. For the Seal Blaze Gun Chandra. Yes, it's only 1 copy, but Chandra you play by Soul Blasting 1, and when your Vanguard attacks, you can counterblast 2 to give it drive plus 1. This is what I mean for full offensive mode. So, depending on what battle state that you want, you're going to have certain types of weapons. And this is what I like about this deck. Because this deck is going to have certain ways that you're going to be playing depending on what stance you want. If you want to go speed and defense, you're going to obviously start off with the spear with the shield. That's speed with defense. But if you're going to go full offensive mode, you're going to have the sword and the gun. I know that many people are not going to play the gun, and counterblasting 2 for 1 drive check can be really underwhelming, but that 1 extra drive check can be very nasty sometimes, especially when you're able to counterblast 4 total for the full offensive attack. Keep in mind, your Basagra is going to be at least 23k with a crit, and there is another card that will give a huge massive power boost on top of it. So unless your opponent has a PG, it's going to be pretty difficult to block the attack. So I do run the 1 gun just so we could go full offensive mode. Most of the time you're not going to go for it, but it is always good to have that option. Especially that even if this card's in your drop zone, there is ways to just re-equip it. So as long as you see it and you just have the option, it's good enough for me. But like I said before, the shield is the more likely weapon that you're going to be on pretty much all the time. But hey, more options is always good. We have the spear, sword, gun, and shield. Hopefully we get more weapons soon. We'll probably just get one with 1 crit soon, or maybe one that will disperse all weapons for Basagra to attack again. Who knows? Maybe even evolve Basagra that could override the restriction on these weapons where you can only equip it on this specific Basagra. So that's it for the weapons lineup with the Basagra itself. Now to the supporting cards, which the next one is Seal Blaze Dragon Aldera. Aldera, when it's placed, you can counterblast 1, place an arm card from your hand, or drop zone to Basagra if it's already armed. So this is just another way to get your 2 arms card. It's just there, it helps out, so of course you run it. One thing I would like is being armed from deck, but that might be a little too powerful, I'm not gonna lie. But overall, it just gets your 2 arms card as early as you can, so it just helps out. And also sometimes it just also speeds up your full offensive mode if you want to go for that as well. And yes, it does override the cost of the arm card. It basically just says counterblast and just place the arm card because you're not playing the arm card directly. So that's also good sometimes too, because sometimes you don't want to soul blast. And then the second skill, if your Vanguard's armed, plus 5k. 18k beater. Pretty nice. But what's important is that you can arm another card. That's it for the grade 3 lineup, along with the weapons. That's a lot of grade 3 weapons. To the only grade 2 of the deck, Twin Bullet of Duststorm Travis. Yes, this card is basically made for Eugene, and Duststorm is basically Eugene. But this card works so well in Basagra too because it is generic, and it also combos well with Basagra skill. Because when your opponent's rearguard is retired, you can counterblast 1, soul charge 1, which will help a lot, choose another of your opponent's rearguards and retire it. So now you got some back row removal because Basagra can only nuke the front row. And it also gets plus 10k. Yeah, it just extends more plays, and also that soul charge really will help. So that's it for the grade 2 lineup. Now for the grade 1 lineup. Seal Blaze Dragon Isaita. So Isaita gets plus 2k power for every card in your Vanguard. Not including Soul because it is a reminder text, but it's your Vanguard and your 2 armed cards. So that's plus 6k power total, which will make it 13k. Now the reason why I run this over some other cards is because this deck will call a bunch of grade 1s or less from your drop zone, especially one of your supporting grade 0s, which is the opposite of Trickstar. But sometimes this deck does lack attacking power, and this being a grade 1 to be another option for Basagra to call just really helps out. So I decided to run this over cards that can maybe retire more of your opponent's rear guards in early game, but this card can also work early game as attacker, so it does have that use as well, and it's also a pretty nice booster in many cases as well. I just prefer this, and so far it's been helping me so well, especially when Basagra is calling more stuff, and this could become a pretty big beater on your front row, and that can attack on its own without boosting. So it's pretty good. And then for the last of the grade 1s, you obviously have to run PGs. And now to the grade 0 lineup, not the trigger one. The polar opposite of Trickstar, which is also a sun, keep that in mind, that a sun is a star. Here's Trick Moon. So Trick Moon has the ability of Dress Boost, where when this card boosts, the boosted unit gets plus 10k power for every arm card on your Vanguard. And yes, this also includes your other 2 rearguard columns, which will be very huge, and most of the time, it will be plus 20k unless you go full offensive mode. So that will be really huge its own, and that's what I meant, that Basagra can reach really huge numbers, especially with discards. And in lore-wise, in the anime, the dress boosts represent supporting each other, hence why giving the extra power. But it has another skill where, when it's called from drop zone to the center rearguard column, so basically behind the Vanguard, you get to countercharge. It's nice that this skill is generic, because at least that you could play this with Nirvana if you want to. But you're most likely not going to do that, because this card is clearly meant for Basagra because of that one skill, because this card is clearly meant for Basagra because you do want your weapons on your Vanguard. But nonetheless, this is your main booster, and you do want to see this as soon as you can. So that's the normal units. To the trigger lineup, the over trigger, because why not, and also double restand on 2 crits each, and also a restanding critting Vanguard is pretty nasty, especially if it has its weapon still. I of course go for the 8 crits. I was running the Blaze Maiden crit, but the 3 draws. So why I choose draws over fronts, for example, is because you want to draw those weapons as soon as you can and draw and filter out the deck. Because you really want to draw those weapons as soon as you can, especially some key pieces, to get your second weapon, and also draw and filter out the deck. Because one problem I had playing stands was that sometimes I actually have bricky hands and I'd rather be able to draw cards. But running stands isn't exactly too bad either, because they are 20k shields and you do have a huge grade 3 lineup because of your weapons. Although you do have a free 10k shield, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. But I do prefer the draws. And finally, the 4 heals. So that's it for this deck profile. What do you guys think of it? What other changes that you guys think I could make? I did think about running the grade 1 promo from the sneak peek where you could just... I did think about running that grade 1 promo where you just place it and then just counterboss one to retire one of your opponent's back row, which is not bad. But I do still prefer more attackers, especially that this deck sometimes can lack attackers, and a grade 1 attacker can be really good because this deck will call the grade 1 with no problem. So there are other options that you could definitely play. You could take out the bow if you want. If you don't really want to play it at all, it's not too necessary. But I always like the option of going full offensive mode, so I just play it. But on that, it's just very simple at the moment since we only have the start deck along with set 4, basically giving a good introduction to Basagra now. I do really hope that we get the Evolve Basagra soon, especially because we got the Evolve Nirvana, so we have to have the polar opposite of that. And considering that this deck is technically the polar opposite because we have Trick Moon, which is the opposite of Trickstar, we kind of have to have it. So I really hope for that soon. But on that, that's it for this, and see you all next time.